He is steadfast. For that reason he subordinates his sentiments to principles. They are the less subject to inconstancy and alteration, the more general is this principle to which they are subordinated, and thus the more extensive is the elevated feeling under which the lower ones are comprehended. All particular grounds of inclinations are subjected to many exceptions and alterations in so far as they are not derived from such a high ground. The cheerful and friendly Alceste says, I love and treasure my wife because she is beautiful, flattering, and clever. But what if, when she becomes disfigured with illness, sullen with age, and, once the first enchantment has disappeared, no longer seems more clever than any other to you? If the ground is no longer there, what can become of the inclination? By contrast, take the benevolent and steady Adraste, who sings to himself, I will treat this person lovingly and with respect because she is my wife. This disposition is noble and generous. However the contingent charms may change, she is nevertheless always still his wife. The noble ground endures and is not so subject to inconstancy of external things. Such is the quality of principles in comparison to emotions, which well up only on particular occasions. And thus is the man of principles by contrast to one who is occasionally overcome by a good-hearted and lovable motivation. But what if the secret language of his heart speaks thus? I must come to the help of this human being, for he suffers. Not that he is my friend or companion, or that I hold him capable of some time repaying my beneficence with gratitude. There is now no time for ratiocination and stopping at questions. He is a human being, and whatever affects human beings also affects me. Then his conduct is based on the highest ground of benevolence in human nature and is extremely sublime, on account of its inalterability as well as the universality of its application. Immanuel Kant. You cannot judge whether somebody is a good person merely by looking at his actions, because good actions alone don't make a good person. They also need to be done for the right, for moral reasons. And here Kant says that we can judge somebody to be a good person, or we can call somebody a good person in three different ways. Because to Kant, the human being as such has three different natures. We have an animal nature, a sensual nature, and in that sense, somebody could be good natured or have a good mind. That is, that person could be good in a negative sense. That person could be docile. That person could be someone who doesn't easily get aggressive, who doesn't get in others' way. Um, Secondly, however, we have a mixed nature because we are thinking, we are intellectual animals. And based on that second nature, somebody could be good in the sense of being good hearted, having compassion, having empathy. And that is not just negative goodness, not getting into others' way, not causing harm, not doing evil, but that is a more positive goodness, actually helping others, actually being there for others. And then lastly, we are spiritual beings, we are intellectual beings, we are rational beings. And as such, we can be good in the sense of having a good character, following good principles. And it is this last thing which I want to talk about here in this lecture. The good character, which Kant also calls the mode of thinking, while the mind or the nature and the heart, so the first two parts, they together make up the mode of sense. Both mode of thinking and mode of sense, um, both refers to more or less what we would usually call someone's personality. But the difference is that the mode of sense to Kant is the personality insofar as nature made it. Nowadays, we would probably say the genetical makeup of somebody, how the genes influence the way someone behaves, someone feels. So this is not what we have created and shaped ourselves, but rather this is what nature made of us. And on the other hand, the third thing, the character, which Kant calls not a mode of sense but a mode of thinking, that is our personality insofar as we ourselves shaped it, right? So by your nature, from your mode of sense, you could be inclined to being a more timid, a more shy person, but you could think about how you should be, and you could come to the conclusion that you should not always be shy and timid. And through this thinking of yours, you could make yourself someone who stands up, who takes charge, even if that is not in your nature. So, in that way, we don't have to just accept our personality as it is. We can change it, or rather, we can. The natural personality as such cannot be shamed, but we can put another, let's say, layer over it. We can form our own personality for ourselves. And the first part, the mode of sense, so the mind, the heart, that I discussed in my previous lecture, where I also explained why for Kant it has no moral value as such, even if it does lead to good actions or to the prevention of bad actions. Precisely because it comes only from nature. It's not something we chose to be, it's just how we happen to be. And I explained in that other lecture that to Kant it is possible to have a somewhat good mode of sense and still become an evil person. I gave the example of Neo, who to Kant was good natured, but because he wanted to please, because he was superficial, because he had no firm character, he let himself become lustful and cruel. And on the other hand, in that lecture, I gave the example of Socrates, who to Kant is somebody who had a bad mode of sense, who had a bad mind that was inclined to aggressiveness, maybe, who also had a bad heart that was inclined to being cold and uncaring towards others, but who, through his reason, because he simply thought about how he should be, shaped himself into a virtuous person. So, in that sense, these, you could say, two personalities, the mode of sense and the actual character, the mode of thinking, they are very distinct for Kant. And this distinction is important in many respects, like in small everyday questions, for example, when it comes to drinking. Many people think that alcohol, drunkenness, brings out a person's true character, right? So somebody who usually is more reserved might suddenly become more outgoing when drunk, or somebody who usually is more friendly and respectful might become more aggressive and easily irritated when drunk. Um, but here Kant says no. Um, what alcohol brings out is not our character. It's not how we are in the way of, in the sense of how we made ourselves, but rather what alcohol brings out is what nature made of ourselves. It brings out our sense mode. Because, yeah, to be sure, it may be that someone by his nature is a joyful, a cheerful, a funny fellow. Um, but he forces himself to be more serious and more stern and more reserved usually. But when he gets drunk, then this cheerfulness and this funniness comes out. Or it may be that someone by his nature is inclined to be rude and aggressive and start fights, but usually he restrains himself. But when he gets drunk, he stops restraining himself, and that nature comes out. So, in that sense, alcohol can reveal something about a person, but not about his character, but rather about his mode of sense. The only thing drunkenness reveals about the actual character, Kant says, is the lack thereof. Because a person of character, a person of firm principles, would not get himself into a situation, into a state where he loses his character, where he can't follow his principles anymore. But the distinction is also important for bigger, for more philosophical questions. For example, there's the old debate if humans are by nature good or evil. It's something that Rousseau, who influenced Kant very much, discussed. And Rousseau famously is of the opinion that by nature human beings are good, and it is mostly society which makes people go bad, which gives people unnatural drives and desires. The luxury of society is something that the natural person would not desire. And we would probably be better off if we lived a more simple, more natural life, if we abolished this unnatural civilized society and went back to the natural state. And this is an opinion that has more or less formed the fundament till this day of leftist ideology, right? Various leftists usually think that deep down humans are good, and they are only bad because they live in the wrong society, they are socialized in the wrong way, they have the wrong milieu. And if we just get rid of capitalism, or if we just get rid of patriarchy, like if this hierarchical society is abolished, or if private property is abolished, if people are not longer raised with racism or whatever, um, then that true good nature will come out, and people will live in harmonious communes with each other. And opposed to this is the opposite opinion that you may find more on the right. That has been the conservative opinion since the days of people like Berg or de Maistre, which is that no, human beings are evil by nature. Um, they are bad, they are inclined to vices, to selfishness, and if they were left to their natural state, everything would end in chaos. They would probably kill each other or steal from each other or whatever. There could be no society. And so you need to put them in chains, at least to some degree. You need social hierarchy. You need the family and a patriarchal father, or you need a strong authoritarian state which provides law and order, so as to restrain the bad human nature. And in this debate, Kant's position would be to say the question is asked the wrong way. Like if you ask, are humans by nature good or evil? Kant would say they are neither, because morality is not a thing of nature. Morality is exactly about what we make of ourselves. It is about our will, our own decision. So we can be good, we can be evil, but by nature we are neither. Now, Kant would probably be inclined to go more with Rousseau. He would say that the mode of sense of most people is not so bad. So there are many people that are good natured or that have a good heart. And indeed, it often is only society with its luxury, with its influences, with its ideologies, which twists this nature of humans and makes them act worse than they would if they were only going by their nature. So Kant would surely not go so far as to say that this is true for all humans, that all humans are good-natured and good-hearted. There are certainly also others. But for Kant, the point would be that this is not what matters, even if the mode of sense, so the natural personality, so to say, of humans is more good than evil and only gets more bad, more twisted by a twisted society. This still doesn't make them morally good. Just like an animal which by its nature is not particularly aggressive or harmful, like cows or sheep, is therefore not morally good. But rather, what matters in the moral sense is only what we make of ourselves, is only our character. And that's precisely why, once again, the good mode of thinking, the good character, or rather character in general, is what I want to talk about here. Because to start off with this right away, of course, character as such is not necessarily good. Just like the first two ways in which someone can be good, like the mind or the heart, are not necessarily good according to Kant. You can also have a bad mind or a bad heart. So a character as such is not necessarily good. But there is one important difference, and the difference is that Kant says everyone has a mode of sense. So everyone has a mind and a heart. Whether it's a good or a bad one, now that might vary from person to person, but everyone has those. Everyone has by nature certain feelings, certain desires, certain inclinations. While on the other hand, a character, be it a good or an evil character, is something more rare. there's also, besides having a good or an evil character, the third possibility, and this is probably true for most people, of having no character at all. Most people, to Kant, are characterless because, again, the mode of sense you have to have, because this is what nature makes of you, and we all have a nature. But the character, the mode of thinking, is what you make of yourself, and you don't have to make something of yourself. You can also make nothing of yourself. So therefore there are many people without character. But what precisely is character? What does it mean to have character? Well, Kant says a man of character is he who follows principles. So if you think about how should I act, and you come to a certain conclusion, no matter whether it's a right or a wrong conclusion for now, and therefore set yourself a principle. You say, I will always act in this manner from now on. For example, I will always be honest. I will not tell lies because I believe that it is wrong to lie. And then you stick by that principle. Then that shows character. If you don't stick by your principle, like if you say, oh, I've thought about smoking, like I've been smoking so far, but I realize it's unhealthy, I should probably stop. um, I I plan to stop next year, and then New Year's passes, and maybe you don't smoke for some days or some weeks, and then you start smoking again, thereby breaking your own principle. Then that shows that you don't have character. To be more precise, when I say principle, I mean what Kant calls maxims, because to him there are two types of principles. Laws would be objective principles, so they would be principles, universal principles that we have to follow. Like, for example, the laws of nature you have to follow. If you fall out of a window, you have to fall down because of gravity. You cannot decide to suddenly fall up instead. Likewise, the law of the state where you live, you have to follow those laws, otherwise you will be punished. While the maxim is what Kant calls a subjective principle. So it is one that you set for yourself, so to say, a law you give yourself, and for that reason you don't have to follow it necessarily. You could always break with your maxim, but again, that would show that you don't have character. Having character means setting for yourself a maxim, a subjective principle, and then acting as if it was an objective principle, as if it was a law, following it in all instances. And maybe this is also helpful in understanding Kant's categorical imperative better. So understanding the moral law. I gave a previous lecture about the moral law, the categorical imperative. And famously, Kant says morality means, or categorical imperative says, act always according to a maxim through which you can also want for it to become a universal law. What this means is that, first off, to be a moral person, you should have character. That is, well, your actions should not be random. They should not be dictated just by your nature, just by your drives, but rather you, through your own reason, should set maxims for yourself that you want to follow. You should set subjective principles. Then you have character. But if it is to be a moral character, a good character, then those maxims should be such that they, as maxims just being subjective principles, that they could be laws, that is, they could be objective principles. In other words, if you have character, if you follow maxims, you can ask yourself, what if everybody had this character and had to have this character? What if everybody had to follow my maxims? What if those maxims were no maxims, no subjective principles, but if they were objective principles, if they were laws of nature even? And then you can clearly see that, for example, the maxim to not lie, to always tell the truth, like if that was a law of nature, if everyone had to tell the truth, okay, that could work. But the maxim of being deceitful, of tricking others, if it benefits me somehow, uh, that cannot be a universal law. Like, I can maybe follow this maxim, it can be my subjective principle. I can say, okay, I will take every advantage I can get, even if it harms others. So, if in some case lying gives me an advantage, then I will take it. But it could not work if everybody did that, because then no one would trust each other anymore, and therefore we could not lie to each other anymore, because the lies or even the truth would not be believed anymore, and therefore it would no longer bring an advantage, right? But again, I have talked about this more extensively in the lecture on the categorical imperative. Here, let's stay with what is character in general. Not necessarily a good character, just character in general. And again, having character means following a maxim, a subjective principle of your actions. So, in that sense, having character means the opposite of being led by whims, being hypocritical, being an opportunist. Kant would say that having a character makes you reliable, right? I cannot rely on a person who doesn't have character. I never know what will happen next, how he will act next. Kant even says that someone without character is not really a person. As personhood to Kant means having unity with yourself. And if you don't have character, it's rather as if you were several persons, as if you had some sort of split personality, or if all the time your soul would vanish from your body and be replaced with another soul, giving you a new personality. Because in one situation you will act this way, and then the next you will this way. Like, one time you may be honest, one time you may be dishonest. Like someone with character, for example, you would know either he's always honest or he's always dishonest. Let's say some policeman or someone, you would know either he can't be bribed or he can always be bribed. But then there might be characterless policemen where one day you can bribe him, and the next day when you try to bribe him again, he gets infuriated and angry by that, and he goes, "Oh, how dare you? How dare you imply I could be bribed? How dare you imply I'm corrupt?" And this anger is in that moment genuine, like it's an honest anger. In that moment, he really feels angry at the implication of corruption, even though at another moment he actually is corrupt. So the characterless person is unreliable. Kant compares those people at some point to mosquitoes in a swarm that 1 second fly in that direction and then they dart in the other direction, and it seems completely aimless, like they are not flying in a straight line towards a straight goal, but rather they just seem to aimlessly fly here and there. While on the other hand, if you have character, Kant says that makes you an analogon of nature, because nature to Kant is reliable, because nature is under natural laws, and therefore you know what's going to happen. If you know cause and effect, if you know A produces B, then that's reliable. Then you know that next time A will again produce B. Um, this is precisely why our natural science, our physics works, and this is why our technology works, right? I know that if this button pressing it turns on my computer, then if I press it again tomorrow, it will again turn on my computer. I can rely on that. I know that tomorrow it won't suddenly the same button that today turned on the computer won't suddenly lead to the computer exploding or flying away or whatever. And in a way, the man of character, Kant says, is like nature. It is as if he was under a natural law compelling him to always act in the same manner. Of course, that's not the case. This is not heteronomy, but rather it's autonomy. So he's in fact under a law he gave for himself. He compels himself to always act in the same manner. But the effect, so what it looks like from the outside, is as if he was, so to say, programmed, like a robot programmed to always act in a certain way. And in this sense, being an analogy of nature, being reliable, this is how you should be if you have character. However, Kant stresses that this should always come from your rational reflections and your rational insight, that you should actually act in that manner. It should not be mere habit. Because to be sure, many people are to some degree reliable, you know how they will act and react, but not because they necessarily have real character, but just because they are used to acting in a certain manner. And if nothing makes them change their ways, then they just don't. And this Kant stresses is not how you should be. That would mean becoming mechanical. That would mean actually becoming like an automaton, Kant says, and nothing, not even doing good deeds, nothing should ever become a habit, because then you do it, well, out of some mindless mechanism, which first off means that it loses all moral value, because if it doesn't come from your decision but just from a habit, then again you're just like a programmed robot. So it's not really, it's not your own merit, it's not something you can be praised for. And second, habits can be broken. There could always be something could happen that makes you lose that habit, and if you only acted good out of habit, then that would mean you would stop acting good. So Kant says that generally you should avoid forming habits, even good habits. You should always rule over yourself and do things because you really, understand that they should be done. However, Kant says there are some exceptions, especially when it comes to old age. This is mostly about health, not about morality. I already gave a lecture on the philosopher as a healer, so what Kant says about health and the relationship between philosophy and medicine. And Kant would say that for most of our life, when it comes to what is healthy for us and what our diet should be, we can mostly rely on our body and how we feel. But in old age, that may change. So, for example, Kant would say mostly follow your appetite. So, eat when you're hungry and eat how much you need, eat what your body asks for. But when you become old, you may lose your appetite. So if you still just follow your appetite, that may lead to you eating too little. So here in old age, it might be rational, Kant would say, to set yourself a set time of the day when you eat, and to set for yourself a set amount of food that you will eat, whether you are feeling appetite or not. And in this sense, you're allowed to become a bit mechanical and to form some habits in old age, but this should be the exception. And it's also important to stress this because there is this prejudice about Kant, or this cliche that he himself led a very mechanical life, um, that he had all these um, set rules, what he would do and when he would do it, that his whole day was planned down to the second. Like there's even this rumor that the people of Königsberg used to set their clocks according to Kant, because he was always so on time. Um, this is in fact wrong. This is anecdote that gets told and retold all the time. It's actually based not on Kant. It's based on a theater play written by one of Kant's acquaintances, a guy named Hippel. And Hippel placed the person in his play not on Kant but on a friend of Kant's. But anyways, um, what many people, the image many people have of Kant is a bit distorted, because when Kant died, several of his friends and acquaintances published books about Kant's biography, or mostly their own memories with Kant. And many of them were younger than Kant. He outlived most of his older or of similar age friends. And so these younger friends had mostly known Kant in the last 1 or 2 decades of his life. So the memories they publish, they are mostly of the old Kant. And yes, in old age, as I said, Kant formed some habits. Kant became a bit more mechanical. But this can easily, if you just read these memories, they can give you a distorted picture of the kind of person Kant was, or the kind of character he had. It's not like his whole life was so pre-planned to the smallest detail. Kant would say that only if you have character are you truly free. Because I already explained that in my lecture on what is freedom to Kant, and also then on the lecture, Do We Have Free Will? To Kant, freedom does not mean what it means to most superficial people nowadays. He doesn't have this liberal concept of freedom, where freedom is just being able to be irrational, being able to do any stupid thing that goes through your head. To him, freedom doesn't mean following every whim. To him, freedom doesn't mean being able to get what you desire, but rather reflecting about what you desire and what you should desire. I mean, is it really you who desires it, or is it just nature in you making you desire it? And is what you desire really a good thing? The drug addict who gets his drugs is not free just because he gets what he wants. Rather, he would be free if he were free of his addiction, if he wouldn't need those drugs anymore. So, to Kant, freedom doesn't mean being pulled here or there by your nature, but rather directing yourself. To him, freedom means our ability to act according to our own concepts of good and bad, or good and evil. So we can think, we can reflect, we can use our reason to think about what should happen, what would be good, both in a moral sense, like should I tell the truth here or should I lie? Should I kill this person or should I save this person's life? But also in a pragmatic sense, like should I smoke or maybe shouldn't I because it's not good for my health? And then when you answer that question for yourself and you say, according to my rational reflection, this is good, this should happen, and this is bad, this should not happen, then being able to actually let this insight rule you. So actually do what you say is good and actually don't do what you say is bad. That is freedom. And that is precisely why only he who has character is free, because he is governing himself. He said, this maxim is good. I understand that this is a good principle that should be followed. And now I follow it, even if my nature might tempt me to go into another direction. Because again, I will always have a mode of sense, sure. I will always have a certain temperament. I will always have certain desires and inclinations. But the question is, should I actually follow them or not? Right? Like if someone, to go for an extreme example, if someone is a pedophile, that doesn't necessarily make him an evil person. Like he didn't decide to have these desires. But the true freedom would not be to go through with it and to rape a child. The true freedom would be if he understood through his reflection that following those desires would be evil, and if based on that he reined in those desires and decided to not follow them. And he would still be a pedophile then, but he would be a morally good pedophile because he would be a pedophile of character who doesn't let this pedophilia rule him. And this, as I already said, this is something rare, Kant says. Many people don't have character. I mean, you can think about yourself, of course, whether you have character. But even if you do, you can think about the people you know from your relatives, your colleagues, your friends and acquaintances. And I'm pretty sure that you will find that the majority of people you know, maybe all of them, don't really have character. Like I know many people that are not reliable even in smallest things. Like there are people I know, when they say, hey, I like you, we should definitely meet up again and have coffee sometime, I will never hear from that person again. Or I know people where when they tell me, oh, I will send you pictures from my vacation, I will never see those pictures. Or I know people where when they tell me, oh, I will finally get therapy, this can't go on, I need therapy. I know that a year later they will still not have seen a psychologist. Or I know when someone tells me, oh, I will finally get out of my toxic relationship, I will finally break up with my boyfriend, then either she won't do it at all, or maybe she will break up and then 3 weeks later he will turn up and make big doe eyes and bring her some flowers and she will get back together with him. So many people don't have character. They are, once again, they are like the mosquitoes in a swarm, darting here, darting there. You cannot take them by their word. And this does not mean that they are conscious and intentional liars. It does not mean that these things they say, that they don't mean them the instant they say them. They really do in most cases. but it means that they are always pulled here and there by their sensuality. Like the guy who says, "Oh, we should meet up and have coffee sometime." Right now, he's talking to me, and he's probably enjoying that conversation, and that's what makes him think, "Hey, we should have another such conversation. I enjoy this. I will enjoy it again if I meet him again next week." But then, as soon as we go our separate ways, um, that immediate feeling of enjoyment vanishes and is replaced by other feelings. He does other things, he goes about his life, he has other feelings, good feelings, bad feelings, and he forgets how he felt when he talked to me, and that it made him want to talk to me again, and so he never calls, right? Or the girl who says, "Oh, I should break up with my boyfriend," he might treat her particularly shitty one day, and um, that might drive her to actually break up because now she's ruled by that feeling. Uh, but then after 3 weeks, she might be ruled by the feeling of missing him, or he turns up again and now he doesn't act shitty, but rather he acts nice, he brings her flowers. And if I'm someone who's just always pulled around by feelings, by sensualities, and remember, I said that in many other lectures, that sensuality to Kant means receptiveness. So we are sensual insofar as we are affected by something. So uh, other things influence us, other things um, cause certain feelings, certain sensations in us. Uh, if that is what rules you, then of course you won't have character because those sensations, those affections, they change. The only thing that doesn't change is your own resolve, if you have one. If you decide this is right, I talked about this, I understood that this is the right thing, so I'm gonna do it, then you will be reliable. But if you just go with the moment's feeling, then that's fleeting. The next moment will bring about another feeling. And for Kant, having character is something noble, something that is worthy of respect, even if the character in question is not necessarily moral as such. Like, even if it's just something simple, like you floss every night, and even if some evening you don't feel like it, you're tired, you don't just tell yourself, "Oh, what does it matter? I can floss again next day. I can skip one day," and then probably the next day you skip again, and the day after you skip again, and even though you told yourself you will always floss, you end up only flossing like once or twice a month or so. No, if you say, "I understand that this is good for my teeth, I should always floss," and then do it. Or if you say, "I understand that smoking is bad, I should stop," and then you actually stop. And there are people who can do that, right? Who have character like that. Like I have a friend whose dad, some years ago, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. Thankfully, they found it pretty early, so they could remove it, and it didn't come back. But they told him, "You need to stop smoking," and he was like, he had smoked all his life since he was, I think, a very young teenager. But he was like, "Okay," and didn't touch any cigarettes anymore from one day till the next. So um, that is character, that shows strength of character. And even though that's maybe not a particularly moral action as such, Kant says this is still something we should pay respect to. And this is something that actual morality can be built on. Like, if someone already has character, if someone already has this ability to govern himself, then all that's needed for him to start acting morally is to understand, to maybe be explained to um, how he should act, what moral actions would be. But if somebody is without character, then even if he understands that certain actions would be morally good, that this is how he should behave, he will still not be able to push himself to actually stick to that, to actually follow through on his moral principles. Um, so therefore, Kant says even a somewhat wrong character, like even if someone has maxims that you might think are bad or silly or whatever, um, if he just follows through with them, that still should get some respect. Like think of people who follow the commandments of some cult or another, like um, the Mohammedan who really goes through with praying 5 times a day, or with fasting during Ramadan, or the Mosian who really goes through with not working on Saturdays, not even switching a light switch or whatever. Um, while this may not be moral as such, while it may even be superstitious if those people believe that this is really what God cares about, um, it shows that they have this ability to rule over themselves. They are not just ruled by their natural drives, like wanting to fast, but then they get too hungry, so they eat, or um, wanting to pray, but then they are feeling too lazy and just not feeling like it. No, they actually go through with it. This is a sort of fundament, Kant would say, on which morality could be built. On the other hand, if you are without character, then you are not a true human being, Kant would say. Like, you are just a potential human being. You could become human, but you are not truly human. You are more like an animal. Um, to be without character, Kant would say, is really pathetic. It means throwing yourself away, throwing your own humanity away, because humanity is not the central part, which we have in common with the animals, but rather humanity is our rationality. And if you, through your rationality, understand that something is good, should be done. Like, for example, you understand that you should stop smoking because it's better for your health, and still you can't follow your own rational insight, your rationality has no influence on your actions, you are pathetic. And this cannot be respected, not by others and not by yourself. Like, if you cannot rely on yourself, you lose your self-respect. You cannot take yourself seriously anymore. And such a person, such a person's speech cannot be taken seriously anymore. Instead of being a human, he's just like a speech machine. Like, words come out of his mouth, but they have no meaning, because you cannot rely on them. Like, this person says, oh, okay, I decided I want to lose weight, I decided to go on a diet, and then 2 days later you see that person eating and snacking again. So those words really didn't mean anything. And even if you yourself have no character at the moment, you should at least be able to appreciate character in others. You should at least be able to recognize that there is someone who has character, and to respect them for having character, even if you may not agree with the particular maxims that they follow. You should respect that they follow maxims at all. And on the other hand, when you see that someone doesn't have character, you should lose respect for them. You should stop taking them seriously. You should find them as pathetic as they actually are. If you don't even have that, like, I'm not talking about whether you yourself have character or not, but if you can't even respect or disrespect having or not having character in others, um, then you're almost a lost cause. Then that shows how far you are from any sort of Aufklärung. Because if you respect it in others, you will want to respect yourself too. So you will probably want to be like those others. You will probably want to be a person of character too. But if you cannot even respect and appreciate it in others, then that shows that you care and think so little about having character that it's not likely that you yourself will ever have one. And unfortunately, that is precisely the state right now, right? What Kant says about character is very, very untimely. We live in an age of characterlessness where people don't care about not only about themselves but also about others having character. Like it doesn't even cross their mind. It's not something they judge. Like they don't even ask the question, does this person have character or not? And I mean, just look at politics. Look at how public figures are judged. Like our politicians, they usually are completely characterless. They will say one thing one day, and then they will say or they will do another thing the next day. And this goes for pretty much all politicians, right? Sure, maybe to some different degrees, or maybe some will be more open or less open about it, but it goes for all of them. Like, think about how the British Prime Minister, House Starmer, um, shortly after the 7th of October, said that Israel absolutely had the right to impose a total blockade on Gaza and to cut them off from electricity and food. And I mean, he said that in an interview on video. We have the evidence. And still, sometime later, he started not just saying, okay, I was wrong and I'm terribly sorry for having said something like that, for having supported genocide, because that would be one thing, right? Having character doesn't mean sticking by your mistakes. Of course, having character means following a maxim because you understood it to be right, but if you were wrong and if you suddenly realize that your maxim was wrong, of course you can change it. So that would be one thing. But no, he didn't say I was wrong. He just outright denied ever having said that, even though there's video evidence of it. Or here in Germany, where we recently had an election, a big topic was debt, state debt. Should Germany make more debt? And we had a law in the constitution called the Schuldenbremse, so the debt break. So a law that basically said we couldn't make more debts. And to some politicians, to some parties, this law was very, very important. While others said, okay, we should change it, we should break it, we need to take on more debt, we need to spend more money, and therefore we need to make debts. Others said, no, this is in the constitution now, we need to follow it, zero new debts. And then those very people, right after the election, like basically the day after, they said, oh yeah, let's make billions of new debts. And my point is, the problem is that people, when it comes to politics, they only think about what am I for, what am I against, which team is my team. So you will have people in Germany who are either for making debt or who are against it. But you should abstract from the material and you should be able to just look at the form. And my point is, no matter where you stand on in this question, no matter whether you think Germany should make more debts or it shouldn't get more indebted, you should still have equal disgust and equal disrespect for a politician who, before the election and up until the election, says, I'm against this, and then right after completely throws his stance out of the window and says, oh sure, let's make billions of debts. Like, even if you think it's a good thing that they make those new debts, it's still not a good thing that they don't have character. But nowadays, people seem to not care about character. They even seem to worship characterlessness. I mean, look at someone like Trump, who made this his whole shtick, right? Not having character. Being erratic, doing one thing or saying one thing one day and then the next day doing the complete opposite, being unreliable. Instead of this being a cause for disrespect, instead of this being a cause for people to not take him seriously anymore, his fans will not care about that or even treat it like he's pulling off some brilliant moves or whatever. And on the other hand, in the rare case where you do get someone who actually displays character, who actually displays strong principles, if it happens that those principles are not your principles, that those principles are not what you agree with, people cannot respect that. I mean, think of the one person in the public, the one person on the world stage nowadays in our present who probably displays the most integrity and the most firmness of character, which of course is Greta Thunberg. And nobody could seriously deny that, but it's not even talked about. People just go by the material of what she says, not by the form, and just by whether they agree with that or not. So, sure, if people are for climate action, then they will agree with her, they will celebrate her for activism. And on the other hand, if people are against climate action, if people are climate change deniers, they will attack her. But the point is, even if you are a climate change denier, you should still be able to respect. You should then say, okay, she's wrong, she fell for the hoax, but you should still be able to respect her for being consistent in what you think is her wrongness. Like the fact that she doesn't fly, for example. She even when she went from Europe to America, she would rather take a boat for 2 weeks rather than flying. This still got attacked. Like you still had people in Germany. There was quite a bit of that, like stupid discussions, petty little discussions in newspapers about whether that really has a lower climate impact or maybe it has a bigger one because while she didn't fly, other people who were on that boat flew back, which was completely besides the point, right? She herself said that this was not simply to produce less carbon. Rather, it was more so to send a message to show that it's not really possible, it's not really feasible for normal people to, in this society we build, to not produce carbon all the time. So we have to rebuild this society. But the point is, you have many others who talk about the environment, who talk about the climate, like climate scholars or Green Party politicians or other climate activists, like for example the German the leader of the German Fridays for Future section. She's famous for having flown around a lot. Like she she deleted them when it came out, but on her social media she had all these pictures of herself being in South America, in Asia, being all around the world. So you have lots of people who talk about the climate and how we need to change our ways, but still fly around. So you cannot take them seriously. They have no integrity. But Greta Thunberg, even if you do think that there is no climate change, you still have to take her seriously for sticking by her principles. And this, of course, also goes for when it comes to other things than just the climate. This, I think, could be seen in the last year and a half very well because of her activism for justice for the Palestinians, because of her activism against the genocide. Because sure, for this too, she has been attacked, and especially here in Germany, where we live under a fanatical Zionist McCarthyism. There have been a lot of attacks. There have been a lot of newspaper articles saying, "Oh, Greta Thunberg now became an anti-Semite." But if you look at her actual activism, you should understand that to her, in her own mind, she was never simply a climate activist. She always stressed the importance of climate justice. She's a justice activist, and she has always stood up for the weak and for the oppressed. It's not like she only cared about the climate and now suddenly she also criticizes Israel, maybe because she's an anti-Semite. But no, she always cared about the oppressed. Like even in her climate activism, she stressed that it's unjust that the global north is ruining the climate, and then the global south is mainly suffering from it. She stressed that the industrialized countries need to lower their emissions even more, so that the less industrialized countries still have a chance at development. And she stood in solidarity with people in poorer countries suffering from the climate impact, or she stood in solidarity with indigenous people, for example, protecting the rainforest. And when she toured the US and Canada, wherever she gave a speech, she first acknowledged that this was stolen indigenous land of this or that tribe that she was standing on. She stood in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. She stood in solidarity with the Sami people in her Scandinavian home. So it is very clear that, at least in her mind, she is standing in solidarity with the Palestinians and with their anti-colonial struggle. So even if you disagree with that, even if you believe that here she went wrong and fell for some propaganda and the Palestinians are not the oppressed ones, you should still be able to have respect for her having character and having firm principles. And it's quite funny if you take a more holistic look, if you don't just focus on, oh, she's for the climate, or oh, she's against Israel, but if you look at all she has said, it's quite funny because then you can see that everyone else around her has no character. So, for example, in 2022, there was the climate conference in Egypt, and she didn't go there, saying, well, Egypt is an authoritarian, despotic state, and I don't want to support that. And many Egyptians, many Arabs, many Mohammedans back then, 3 years ago, attacked her and said, oh, why are you criticizing Egypt? Why are you not criticizing Israel? Which, of course, was an incredibly stupid question. The simple answer was, well, the climate conference happened to be in Egypt and not in Israel. I'm pretty sure had it been there, Thunberg would also have criticized Israel in that instance, but this was about whether she would go to that country where it was hosted. But here you can say that many of those Egyptians, Arabs, Mohammedans, they don't care about humanity. They don't care about justice, about human rights, about freedom from oppression. Now, like Toonbay, they stand in solidarity with the Palestinians, but just because they consider them their brothers in faith. Um, but she, on the other hand, she's not there for ideological reasons. She criticizes every oppressor equally. Likewise, yeah, last year she went to Turkey and visited the Kurdish regions, and was quite funny if you looked at the Turkish newspapers. So I have lots of Turkish Kurdish friends who showed me some of the headlines. It was really funny to me because you just had to replace the word Kurds with Palestinians, and you just had to replace the name PKK with Hamas, and then those Turkish headlines read exactly like German headlines. Like they were writing, "Oh, Greta Thunberg is a terrorist supporter because she had stood in solidarity with the Kurds." And this is funny, of course, because the German journalists think that they are so much better than the Turkish journalists. They think that they are real journalists and not propagandists. And of course, they would say, yeah, sure, Turkey is authoritarian and Turkey is suppressing the Kurds, and it is right to criticize that. But then when Thunberg criticizes Israel, she's a Hamas supporter, she's a terror supporter, and she's an anti Semite. Well, likewise, the Turkish journalists probably think of the German journalists as propagandists, and many of the Turkish journalists probably heavily criticize Israel. But then when Thunberg comes along and stands in solidarity with the Kurdish people and criticizes the Turkish government, then they attack her as a terrorist supporter. So you can see that everybody else is treating this like some football match. Like everyone else just has teams, everyone else picks a side, and if you attack the other side, then you are their friend. But if you attack their own side and criticize them, no matter how justified that criticism is, then they go nuts and will attack you. But as for her, she is just for justice and against oppression, and she is consistent in that, and she displays character. She doesn't pick sides like that. It's not some ideological issue, but rather she is always on the side of the oppressed. And again, this is something you should value. This is something you should have respect for. Even if in a particular issue, no matter if it's about the Palestinians or about the Kurds, you think that she somehow went wrong and somehow misjudged. Because still, she is showing more character than you probably are showing. And since we live in such an age of characterlessness, which is not even just characterless itself, but has also no appreciation for character, even in others. Nowadays, Kant often gets criticized for his insistence on the need to have a character, for his insistence on following principles, having maxims. And this criticism is often based just on misunderstandings. Like what Kant actually stands for in his philosophy, and also the kind of person that Kant himself actually was in his life, gets turned into some sort of caricature. And people often think that Kant stands for being needlessly pedantic, like always going by the rules, always sticking to principle, and never budging, never allowing the slightest exception, never leaving any room. But here it is important to realize that to Kant there's a difference between a law and a rule. A rule has generality, but every rule allows for exceptions. It is only a law which is not just general but universal. So a law has no exceptions at all. And to Kant, principles, they have the form of laws. So a maxim, and again, having character means acting according to maxims, acting according to subjective principles that you set for yourself. A maxim, just like a law, like an objective principle, should be universal, should allow for no exception. But you always need rules on how to apply the maxim in a specific situation. And those rules, they may indeed allow for exceptions. So, one example that Kant likes to give is a servant, like a butler. His maxim may be to always do the will of his master. And now let's say one day the master leaves the house, goes somewhere else, and tells his servant, while I'm away, don't let anyone enter my house. This is the specific commandment, but it is not the will. The will of the master is what is behind that commandment. The will is something unspoken, like the will is maybe I don't want any harm to come to my house and my possessions. So therefore, I don't want anyone to be let in while I'm away. So nothing is, I don't know, destroyed or walked out of order or stolen. But the specific command is just one way to realize this general will: no harm shall come to my things. And let's say now a fire breaks out, and people realize, and people come running and want to go inside to put out the fire. Kant says that would be a bad and a very pedantic servant who tried to stop them, who maybe even got into a fight with those trying to put out the fire because he didn't want to let them inside. He needs to be able to think for himself. He needs to understand, okay, what my master said before he went away, don't let anyone inside, that was a rule. So in general, I should follow it. But there might be exceptions that my master didn't foresee. Like he probably didn't expect a fire would break out while he was away. But I need to understand what will stood behind him giving that rule. And out of that will, no harm coming to his place, he himself, if he was here, would probably tell me that now is the time to break the rule. Now I should let people in to put out the fire. Here we need to think of the different thinking faculties we have. So I mentioned in previous lectures that to Kant the thinking faculty has three parts: the intellect, the power of judgment, and reason. All three of those I discussed in respective lectures, so if you want to learn more about them, you can check out those three lectures on intellect, power of judgment, and reason. But in brief, the intellect is the faculty of rules. The intellect lets us think rules, and that's also why through the intellect we understand things, we understand the world, we understand what rules a specific object might be under, how it functions. But it is reason which is the faculty of principles. So and therefore also of maxims, which are subjective principles. So when it comes to having character, this is about using our reason, not just our intellect. This is about, with our autonomy, giving ourselves a principle through our reason, ruling ourselves. And Kant would say, to be taught a rule. I mean, even a machine, even some robot, some AI, you can program with a specific rule, and you can make it so that the machine mindlessly follows the rule. To be taught a rule, we just need the intellect, but we need our own reason to come up with a good principle to follow. And then we need the power of judgment, of course, for application. We need to judge situation by situation, context by context. Is this a case where the rule applies, or is this a case where I should make an exception from the rule? And far from this caricature that exists of Kant, as if he had been just some mindless rule monger, Kant again and again stresses that we should not be pedantic. But being pedantic to him doesn't mean having firm principles from which you never budge, but rather it means mindlessly following a specific rule and having no, or using no power of judgment to judge whether here you should follow that rule or not. But you need to make this distinction between the specific rules and the general principles. You should not be pedantic, to be sure. Kant says that rules are like a baby walker, that the pedantic person who has not left tutelage yet, apparently, puts himself in and thereby prevents his own movement. And this should not happen. Having character, having firm principles, following your own maxims should set you free. I already said that this is the true freedom to Kant. It should liberate you from being a slave to your own drives, to your own whims. It should not be something that puts you into a new slavery. You should not put yourself under the tightly fitted chains of rules that don't allow for any movement. That is not what character means to Kant. And to slavishly follow rules in such a pedantic manner doesn't make true character, rather, it makes a sort of fake character, Kant would say. And the fake character has a similar relation to real character as the fake genius has to real genius. I already talked about what Kant has to say about genius in a previous lecture on what is genius, and in additional lecture on what makes the genius artist. And to Kant, genius means original spirit. The genius artist is someone who doesn't just follow in others' footsteps, who doesn't just copy and mimic others, that can produce art that maybe is good and tasteful from a technical side, but lacks a genius original idea. No, the true genius is precisely original. But Kant, as I explained in that lecture, Kant would say that it is a fruitful and a tasteful originality. The genius becomes an example that others can copy or others can follow. And Kant criticizes that there are many wannabe artists, like the young poets of his own time, of the Sturm und Drang period, or even more so, many pretentious modern and postmodern artists, who sort of fake genius by just abolishing all rules of good taste. because they think since genius is about originality, since genius is about not just following others' examples and following the rules that others have set, but producing something new, they think by producing something new and original, they become geniuses. But no, Kant says you can also produce original nonsense. And while the true genius should be original, he should still somewhat restrict his genius through following the rules of good taste. And again, the same relation Kant sees between so the same relation that is there between the real genius and the fake genius, where people just pretend to be original, just break rules for the sake of being original, for the sake of breaking rules. Likewise, there's the same relation, just sort of reversed, between the true character and the fake character, because he who creates for himself a fake character, since having character means being principled, he will just follow rules for the sake of following rules, just sticking by the rules no matter how nonsensical it may be in a given situation, just so he can seem as if he was principled, just so that he can seem as if he had character. And true character is also original, Kant would say. True character means I have autonomy. I govern and I guide myself instead of being governed and guided. That means that true character is something that only the aufklärt person can have. That is also why Kant's main example for the fake character is the person who wants to be different just for the sake of being different. The person who forces himself to be an eccentric, to go against the grain, to be unfashionable. Like someone who dresses differently from others, not because he has a good reason to do so, or even just because he feels like doing so, but just because it is different. Or someone who speaks differently from others, just to be different. Like there might be good reasons in some cases to speak differently. I myself, as a philosopher, reflect very much about language. It's maybe less obvious here since I'm speaking English, and this is not my first language, and I'm not as secure in it. But in German, I actually do use some words, some expressions that are somewhat unusual, but because I have a good reason to do so, because I reflected about them. Because as a philosopher or just as an aufklärt person, I care very much about having clear concepts and being precise in what you say. So there can be sense to that, and as much as I can, in what is just my second language, I try to do that in English too. Like, for example, here in this lecture earlier, I talked about Mohammedans. I don't just call everyone a Muslim who calls himself that, because the word Muslim has a meaning. It means he who is devoted, he who submits to God. So most self-proclaimed Muslims clearly aren't Muslims. They are just Mohammedans. They follow more or less in the teachings of Muhammad, or whatever they think those teachings may have been. That is an, well, unusual manner of speaking that, however, is justified. But if, let's say, you just speak, you just try to speak Shakespearean English, like you say art instead of are, or cometh instead of come, you may actually feel that this sounds nicer, this is more tasteful. You may actually lament the fact that English changed the way it did. Okay, fair enough, but still it did change in that way, and it would just be ridiculous, and it would just constitute a fake character if you now forced yourself to speak in this outdated manner just because it is outdated. Kant would say that a person like that, who just to show that he has character, does things differently from others, thereby shows that he has no character, because in a way he's still not being original. In a way he's still following whatever is the fashion. He's just doing the opposite, but he still looks first, okay, what is fashionable, what are you supposed to do, instead of thinking for himself what he should do. But this is, of course, not the only reason to create a fake character for yourself. Kant would also say that very, very often it happens precisely because people lack power of judgment, or at least they don't trust their own power of judgment. So, since they don't trust themselves to, case by case, make the right judgment, they will form some rule, or they will seek some rule that somebody else may give to them, and then slavishly follow that rule, thinking that way they will be safe, that way they won't have to make their own judgments. This is the case maybe for many officials or soldiers or so on, who blindly and mindlessly follow rules and follow orders, because they fear the responsibility that would come with making their own judgments and their own choices. But also, those don't have to be orders that come from others. It can also be that you slavishly follow rules that you set for yourself. So, for example, I had in 7th grade, I had a math teacher, who really, I would say, looking back, deep inside was just an insecure person who didn't really know how to deal with students, and how to make sure there's some discipline in the classroom. And so he made it a rule that if you didn't do your homework 3 times, he would write a letter home to your parents. And I mean, I guess fair enough as a general rule for students who just don't bother with school and who just don't do homework at all. But in my case, I usually did do my homework, at least in 7th grade. And I was the best student in the class. I always got excellent grades, and it just happened that in the whole school year I forgot my homework twice. It's not like I didn't do it usually, or I just refused to do it, or I just didn't care. Just 2 times I forgot it. And then right at the end of the school year, right before the big holidays, like 1 or 2 weeks before, like the last or second last homework or so, I forgot again. And to be sure, this pedantic fellow still, even though the grades were already set, like it had no influence on my grades anymore, and even though, once again, I was the best student, he still wrote a letter home to my dad, who found that very amusing and laughed about this teacher of mine. But that is an example of being pedantic and having a fake character out of some sort of insecurity. Like the teacher probably himself would have admitted that I didn't need this letter home. I didn't need my dad to push me into being a better student. But he would probably have said, oh, but rules are rules. I need to stick by the rules. I need to be consistent. Thereby showing that he's too insecure to judge case by case whether the rules should be applied here or not. Kant often gives the example for this fake character sticking by the rules out of insecurity, of a person who is stingy. He says many people are just stingy, they don't want to waste any money because they don't trust themselves with money. And to be sure, you should not mindlessly throw your money away. Like if you just give every friend or even every unreliable acquaintance who asks you for a loan, if you always give them money, or if you give everyone who asks you for a donation, or every beggar on the street your money, maybe you won't have money anymore soon. But the solution to that should not be to set yourself a rule to just give no money, never, but rather the solution should be to be an aufklärt person who has power of judgment and who can judge case by case, should I give my money here or not. But many people don't trust themselves with money like that, and therefore they become stingy. Like I remember I myself have a friend who, ever since he started working and earning his own money, has been saving money to buy an apartment one day. Like he doesn't want to pay rent the rest of his life. He wants to buy his own apartment. And okay, fair enough, but that makes him become stingy. And one time he uh, could have paid like 10 euros for something, for doing a favor, and he didn't wanna. And I was like, well, it's just 10 euros. It's not gonna make you poor, or it's not gonna prevent you from buying your apartment one day that you wanna buy. And he was like, oh yeah, but it's 10 euros now, and then 10 euros tomorrow, and then 10 euros the day after, and then I will never have the money for the apartment. Which, speaking in that general sense, is true, right? If it is 10 euro now and 10 euro tomorrow and 10 euro the day after, then yeah, he will never be able to save enough money. But the point is, no one asked him to pay 10 euro tomorrow and 10 euro the day after. He was only asked to pay 10 euro now, today, once. And it's just if you don't trust yourself um, to make that judgment and to say, okay, today I give 10 euro, but tomorrow I won't do it anymore, then you need to be stingy. Then you may need to create this fake character where you mindlessly follow this self-set rule. But still, even this misunderstanding aside, this belief that what Kant is preaching is being pedantic, mindlessly sticking by the rules. Even that aside, there's a lot of criticism nowadays when it comes to Kant insisting on having a character, on following principles, and also when it comes to this whole concept of duty that Kant has, that morality is about not following our feelings, not being compassionate, but rather doing our duty. And the criticism is often that this is not just unrealistic or unhealthy or pedantic, but rather that this is bad, that this can lead to evil. It even gets to the point, the criticism, where some people accuse Kant basically of being responsible, at least in part, for the crimes of the Nazis, that is, for people. So many people in Germany following orders, doing what they were told, because, according to the critics of Kant, they were following some Kantian concept of having character and being consistent and having integrity and doing your duty. No matter what it is about, even if you have to take part in a genocide. But this kind of criticism is obviously pretty unjust, and it very much misunderstands Kant. For the first part, Kant is not saying that character as such is always and necessarily moral. As I already said, Kant does say that you can also have an evil character. I would I would qualify that a bit. Character in the truest sense needs to be a good character, because after all, what is character? Character to Kant means that I am consistent, that I follow a certain maxim and I stick with it. I'm reliable. But then, what is morality? Well, as I already said, and as I further explained in the lecture I gave on the moral law, on the categorical imperative, um, morality is basically the demand, um, follow a consistent maxim. Follow a maxim that is so consistent with itself that it could be a universal law and still work. Don't be inconsistent. Don't self-contradict. That is the whole morality. Therefore, having a true character and being moral is really one. And therefore, in the strictest sense, you cannot have an immoral character. But in a less strict sense, if by character we just mean any sort of, well, being somewhat reliable and consistent in your personality, having some sort of maxims, even if they are not maxims that could apply as universal laws, then Kant says there's absolutely such a thing as an evil character. He says there are then two types of evil characters. There's the deceitful character and there's the malicious character. And the former, because he's deceptive, he is false, he lies, he has no honor. The former is something we need to, or we are also inclined to despise, while the latter, the malicious, the harmful character, is something we hate because of the damage he causes. And as a side note, Kant would also say that we can somewhat tell a person's character from the looks. You would say that the character shows in the face and in the way someone looks, in someone's eyes. You can see whether they have a good character, whether they display a certain calmness and generosity and friendliness, or you can see whether they have deceitful, lying eyes, or whether they have cruel, cold, malicious eyes. Nowadays, there's this belief that we mustn't judge people by their looks. A person's looks cannot tell anything about how they really are as a person. It seems that this is an extreme reaction to the earlier opinion that by how someone looks, we can tell whether they have whether they are moral people, good people, or whether they are evil people. I mean, there were times when people thought that if someone is blonde and blue-eyed and good-looking, then they must also have a good heart. And if someone is, I don't know, hunchbacked or has warts, then that person, the ugly body reflects the ugly soul. There's obviously nonsense, but it also seems nonsense to me to go to the other extreme and to say that a person's looks has no influence at all, or tells nothing at all about who that person is. And here I think Kant has a good middle position, because I talked about this in my lecture on the relation between beauty, morality, freedom, reason. I explained that to Kant the ideal beauty has two components. There is the sensual component, that is what Kant calls the normal idea of our power of imagination. Our power of imagination, sort of just imagining the middle, the average out of all the humans we have seen. So someone who's not too thin, not too sick, not too tall, not too small. That's the sensual side of the ideal of beauty. And whether somebody conforms with that part of the ideal or not, obviously has nothing to do with his morality. So to be sure, someone could be, I don't know, hunchbacked once again, or have a deformed face or whatever, um, therefore not be conforming to the normal idea of what an average person should look like, and still be a good person, sure. But then, in the ideal of beauty, there's also the second side, and that is that the person and the way they carry themselves, and especially the face, should express a good moral character, should express that person being in concord with his moral purpose. And here, I think Kant is very much right that you can certainly see in some people's faces that they are just cold and evil and uncaring and selfish, and in others' faces you can see the spark in their eyes. You can see the joy. You can see them. I mean, imagine someone like Trump. Have you ever seen him laughing? And I don't mean some self important grin. I mean true, genuine laughing. Can you even imagine him doing that? And on the other hand, if you think of good people, if you think once again, for example, of Greta Thunberg, who laughs and giggles through every other interview, you can just see yeah, the goodness, the love for humanity in such a face. But that aside, Kant does say, yeah, there can be, at least if we are not so strict with the definition of character, there can be such a thing as an evil, be it deceitful, be it malicious character. And he also says that just like a good person who doesn't just have a good mode of sense, who isn't just good natured and good hearted, but rather a good person who has a good mode of thinking, who has a good character, just like such a person is better than the one who's only good by nature. An evil person who doesn't just have a bad nature, who doesn't just have a cold heart, but rather who is evil out of a bad character, is much worse and much more harmful than he who just has a bad nature. And Kant's prime examples for this are Sulla, so the ancient Roman dictator, and Cromwell, so the British dictator from the time of the English Revolution. So, at least in the case of Sulla, Kant believes that he also had a bad mode of sense, that he wasn't even good natured or good hearted, but even by his nature he was already cruel. But Kant believes that he also had an evil character, and so did Cromwell. And that makes them, as rulers, as dictators, much worse. That makes it so that they cause much more harm than a bad ruler like Nero, who, as I said before, and as I said also in the previous lecture, according to Kant, was good natured and just became lustful and cruel because he lacked character. And I think this is something that makes sense, right? If you must have a dictator, if you must have some sort of despot or tyrant, it's probably less bad if he's just someone without character, if he's just someone who's corrupt, who can maybe easily be swayed, someone who maybe is just selfish, just uses his power to enjoy a luxury lifestyle, to have a big car park while the country is going hungry or whatever. That's probably still better um, than a tyrant who has a certain ideology that he actually believes in, and who follows certain principles, who isn't selfish, who isn't mainly looking out for his own self-interest, who isn't just taking the country as something he can exploit for himself, but who actually tries to force his ideology on people. That's probably worse. And therefore, Kant does say, since most people aren't truly morally good, that is, since most people don't have a good character, it is in fact better, in the sense of being less harmful, that they have no character at all, and that they are mainly driven by selfishness rather than having a bad character. Because selfish people are actually not as harmful for their fellow humans or for society in many cases as you would probably think. Um, if they are selfish but also not completely stupid, um, then they will probably not cause too much harm or chaos simply because they don't want to be ostracized by society, or they don't want to get into conflict with the law. So, if you have a somewhat selfish person, but who's not daring enough to risk committing crimes and going to jail, um, then precisely that selfishness will make him act somewhat decently in everyday life. He will follow the laws not because he's good, but because he doesn't want trouble. He will be friendly not because he's genuinely a good person, but because he doesn't want to get into conflict with other people. And therefore, it's better that if people have no character, no good character, it's better that they have no character at all rather than a bad character. I mean, think of the Nazi time. Sure, characterless people would follow the Nazis, would not stand up against the Nazis, would take part in the crimes. But at least once the Nazis were defeated, those unprincipled, characterless people, those opportunists, they accepted the defeat and just as easily integrated into the new, somewhat denazified society. On the other hand, if you had someone who was a convinced Nazi and who had a character, then such a person, even when the Nazis are defeated, would keep being a Nazi. Such a person would probably found a new Nazi party and try to bring Nazism back into power. Or such a person would probably go into the underground and commit terrorist acts, murder Jews from the underground. So, to be sure, in that sense, it's better to have someone who's a unprincipled opportunist rather than someone with an evil character. Kant himself admits that. But it doesn't change the fact that what people really should have is a good character. What really has moral value is having good principles and sticking by them. It's also true, certainly, that someone who is more swayed by sensuality, by his feelings, by something like compassion, um, can, in some instances, more easily be made to stop supporting some evil, while someone who follows some ideology, even despite his feelings, can be harder to change his mind, right? Like this is a issue we have right now, especially here in Germany. A normal unideological person, you just need to present him with some of Israel's war crimes. You just need to show that person how Israel is abducting 12-year-old children, and how Israel is torturing people in its prisons, how people are being abused, how people are even being raped to death, and then how Israelis even protest for the right of their soldiers to rape prisoners, how a soldier who has been filmed raping prisoners can even go on TV and justify his actions. A normal person will just be disgusted and will just immediately stop any support he might have previously given to that state. But if you have someone who has this ideology that still has Germany, and surely not only Germany, in its grip, this pro-Zionist philosematic ideology that says, oh no, we must, this is our historic responsibility, because the lesson of the Holocaust clearly wasn't that we should be for human rights. The lesson of the Holocaust was that we should now support Jews even if they abuse human rights, so we must support Israel. If that is your ideology, your principle, then sure, you are harder to convince. But once again, that doesn't change the fact that ideally everyone should have a good character, and only that has moral worth. And as for Kant saying that morality is about duty, about not following your feeling of empathy or whatever, but rather doing your duty, even if you don't feel like it, even if you have a cold, uncaring heart, that too has only been criticized because it is misunderstood. Because people, when they talk about duty or when they talk about deontology, which is not a word Kant uses, but nowadays an ethics based on doing your duty is called deontological ethics. They just take this word duty and they strip it of all content. Like, they don't ask what kind of duty is it about. And to be sure, if you do that, then the criticism is somewhat right. There has been, especially here in Germany and especially in Prussia. I mean, Kant himself was Prussian, and Prussia became the kingdom which united Germany and which very much influenced the whole of Germany. There has been this empty concept of duty, especially amongst the military and the officials. Just recently, some month ago, I gave a lecture, like a live lecture, not here on YouTube, a live lecture on Kant, and one of the listeners was this old army officer, this old German army officer, so a retired officer. He was probably, I don't know, 70, 80. And he told me right away, oh, in my day, we as officers in the army, we had to follow the categorical imperative. It was expected of us by our superiors. This was a demand from us. And this, of course, has nothing to do with the categorical imperative, because, and I explained that in the previous lectures I gave on freedom and on the imperatives and on the categorical imperative, which you can check out, because to Kant, morality is about autonomy, not heteronomy. So about giving yourself a law, not having a law forced upon you from the outside. So if it is expected of you to follow the categorical imperative, if your superior tells you to do that, you are not following the categorical imperative. At best, you will do the same things that the categorical imperative would demand, but not because the categorical imperative demands it, not because you yourself have reflected about how you should act, but rather just because your superior told you to do that. And I mean, those people, of course, they don't even follow the outward actions that the categorical imperative would demand. Rather, people like this officer, who is probably a dying breed. I don't think that the now active officers in the German army would talk like that. This was really something of the old Prussian officers in the First World War and the Second World War. And I mean, this guy was a bit too young to have already been in the army in the Second World War, but he's probably like the first generation after the Second World War. Um, what they understood by the categorical imperative was really something quite trivial. Like to them, doing your duty, following the categorical imperative means keeping your word, always being on time. Yeah, so being reliable in the most trivial sense. But it certainly didn't mean truly being moral. They never reflected about what that would mean. These kinds of people, oh yeah, they were very reliable. They were people who were always on time and to made it a matter of pride to always be on time or to always keep their word. But they had no problem following Hitler and the Nazis and fighting for them. So yeah, in that sense, the criticism has some merit to it, but again, only if you strip the concept of duty of all content. If you don't think about what really is your duty, and your duty, in the sense Kant meant it, is of course not what someone tells you, like some superior army officer or the head of state, like the emperor or the king or the Führer. I mean, they are just people. Why would they have the right or even the ability to give me a duty any more than my neighbor or random guy from the street has? No, the duty can only be what reason tells me is my duty. So I don't have to mindlessly follow orders, I have to reflect. Um, I'm reminded of a novel, a German novel, probably not that well known outside of Germany, um, by Siegfried Lenz. It's called Deutschstunde, so German lesson. And it deals with the Nazi time and the time immediately after. And the protagonist is a child during the Nazi time and is the son of a village policeman who is not a Nazi per se, who is not a political guy, but who is very much someone who believes in doing his duty, following his orders. And in the novel, there is this artist, a painter who paints what the Nazis call entartete Kunst. So that means degenerate art, and there is there's a ruling that this artist is now forbidden from painting, and this policeman gets the order to enforce that ruling. So he has to regularly check on that artist and make sure that he's not secretly painting. And he does so very dutifully, even though that artist once saved his life as a child when he was about to drown. And then there's one scene close to the end of the war where someone else from the village talks to the policeman and basically says, hey, the war is not going so good for the Nazis. There's probably gonna be a change of government soon, so maybe leave the artist alone a bit. Because if you follow your orders so strictly till the very last day, uh, you will get problems for that once the Nazis are out of power and once people get punished for having followed the Nazis. And the policeman replies to that, I didn't hear that. And if you really want to know, I don't ask what one gets out of doing one's duty, whether it benefits one or not. Where would we end up if we always asked ourselves, and what comes afterwards? One's duty. One can't just do that according to one's mood or as prudence dictates it, if you get what I mean. And I'm sure this scene would be something that many critics of Kant would point at and say, here, that's exactly the point. That shows how that concept of doing your duty no matter what, following the principles no matter what, how dangerous that is. But I ask you to imagine the opposite scenario. Imagine a policeman in 1932 or in very early 1933, so right before the Nazis come to power, who is protecting someone, let's say a Jew, or let's say a socialist or whatever, from a violent mob of Nazi supporters. And let's say that policeman was told, hey, there's gonna be a change of government soon. It's obvious the Nazis are going to rise to power. So maybe think about that next time, because you will get into trouble if till the very last day you have followed your duty and protected this Jew or this socialist. And imagine if to this the policeman would reply with the very same words, saying that I don't think about where it will lead to for me, if it is to my advantage to do my duty or not. I simply do my duty. In that case, we would praise him for that. We would say that is a very sublime reply. So, from that, it should be clear that it is not following your duty as such which is problematic here. And I mean, there have been Nazis who talked about, oh, I did my duty. Sure, someone like Eichmann, who organized the Holocaust, he did also say that he was following the categorical imperative, of course, without really knowing, but that was without really having studied Kant. But on the other hand, you also have people who fought the Nazis, who also said that they were doing your duty. Like, for example, Maria Stromberger, who got called the Angel of Auschwitz, who was a nurse who went into Auschwitz to help as much as she could, to at the risk of her life, smuggled food to the people in Auschwitz, or even weapons, who also smuggled notes, messages between them and also to the outside, making sure the outside world learns of the crimes committed there. And she also, after the war, said, what I did was my duty as a human being. So clearly the problem is not doing your duty. The problem is, what is the content of your duty? So what do you think is your duty? And as for the policeman in the novel of Secret Lens, with Kant, I would ask him, okay, you say that keeping to enforce this prohibition that the painter cannot paint, you say that this is your duty. Why is it your duty? What makes it your duty? And he could not give any other answer except saying, well, because the government decided that he is not allowed to paint. And it is my duty to follow the government. But then I would keep asking, why are they the government? Who made them the government? Who says that they are a legitimate government? And he could only say, well, they are the government, or, well, okay, Hitler was voted into government. But then that would mean it is your duty to follow the voters, to follow the majority and whatever they voted for. Why? Why should they be able to decide what is your moral duty? It is quite clear that whoever is in power is just arbitrary. Doesn't matter if we have a monarchy and the guy in power just happens to be the son of the last guy in power, or whether we have a democracy and the guy in power just happens to be the guy who convinced the most people to vote for him. Still, it is pretty much arbitrary. It could also be someone else in power. So why should there be a specific duty to mindlessly follow that guy's orders and not follow the orders of a random guy from the street that isn't the son of the king or that nobody voted for? But why should he have any less right to give me orders? No, the point for Kant is your true duty is what reason tells you is your duty. Yes, we should follow principles. Yes, we should do our duty, but that is not something empty to Kant, but rather, once again, freedom means being rational, thinking about what ought to happen and what ought not to happen, and then following your own insight, your own concepts of good and evil. And there I'm in full agreement with Kant that this is what actual morality is about: having character, following good principles. And I'm convinced of that, so much so that if I notice that someone doesn't have character, could be the nicest, most friendly, most good hearted person in the world, but if I notice that someone doesn't have character, I will not take that person's moral judgment seriously. Like, I know someone, for example, with whom I had a discussion where he said, "Oh, God beware of moral politics. It's a good thing if we don't have politicians trying to be moral. We need to be pragmatic. We need to be realistic." Um, so when I say, for example, we shouldn't have such economic ties with despotic states like China or like Saudi Arabia, um, then he would say, "Oh, but we need that. It would be bad for our economy to not buy their resources anymore. We can't just be moral. We need to deal with them." Um, I'm sure he would present me with lots of arguments, um, with a lot of sophistry, telling me how this is necessary and not dealing with despotic states would basically ruin our state and our way of living. But I refuse to even listen to these arguments and take them seriously. No matter how prudent, how pragmatic, how well thought out they may sound, I know that this is just rationalization and justification. Because that very same person is completely characterless. That very same person told me in back in March that he would call me back and next week, and that he wanted to meet up with me. And um, now we are entering June, and I still haven't heard from him. So, or that same person told me he would look at some text of mine and give me feedback on that, and that's something he wanted to do in February, and he still hasn't done. So, since he himself is so characterless, I assume that the real reason he doesn't want moral politics is because if politicians had more character, more integrity, if therefore our the way our state acts would be more principled, then he himself would also be forced to, at least to some degree, let go of his characterless way. Then he himself could no longer just mindlessly follow his whims, but would have to um, be a bit more consistent. Now, if someone who really had character, who really was reliable, if he told me we need immoral politics, I would take that more seriously. I would actually listen to his arguments. But that way, from such a person, no. I don't even consider such arguments. I don't even bother trying to refute them. Or likewise, a while ago, someone I've known a while has basically cancelled me, said that something I did was wrong, and she didn't agree with that. And I mean, I've several reasons why I believe that I'm in the right and what I did was not wrong. Uh, like one of those reasons being the fact that this person is basically the only one who thinks this is wrong and in any way problematic, while other people didn't think it was wrong at all. Um, But other reasons aside, one reason why I don't take that judgment seriously is once again because that person has no character. Um, that person, a while ago, quite a while ago already, um, like 2 years or so ago, I proofread that person's bachelor thesis, and it was just a favor I did. I said you don't have to give me anything for it, but still she insisted that she wanted to repay me. And at the time, my shoes were literally falling apart. I needed new shoes, so she said, "I will pay for your shoes. Just buy new shoes for yourself, then tell me what it costed, and I will pay for it." And okay, I did that, and she never paid. And to her credit, at the same time, she was going to another country for half a year to work there. So, amidst the chaos and everything, my email where I told her the price, she may have forgot about that. Um, but the thing is, even if she didn't see that email, she could have remembered her promise and at some point could have asked me again, "Hey, I think you haven't told me what the shoes costed so far, so please tell me, I still want to pay for them." And I actually never brought that up again. I mean, I could have, but again, in the first place, I wanted to just do a favor. I told her she didn't have to pay me anything for it. She insisted on buying the shoes, but I'm tactful and tolerant in such manners. Since she forgot about it, um, the money wasn't so important. I'm fine with paying for them myself. Um, but then, when for some unrelated issue, she ended up saying I was doing something immoral, and she ended up canceling me over it. I did bring up the shoes again, and only then, just to say, "Look, you completely forgot about that." And I never reminded you because I let things slide. I don't immediately cancel people. Um, Even when you do forget a promise, I just look over something like that, and I'm so tactful that I don't even remind you like that. So you don't have to be embarrassed about having forgotten. So why can't you display the same tolerance and tact, even if you do think I did something wrong? And even if before she had forgotten about it, now that I had reminded her, the right thing to do would, of course, have been to finally give me the money for the shoes. But of course, I mean, it's not that I asked for it, but she herself, now having been reminded, should have walked it up and offered the money. Doesn't matter that now she thought I was doing something wrong and therefore she didn't want to talk to me anymore. The promise had been made earlier, and the promise is a promise. Like for me, even if a former friend whom I owed money suddenly became a Nazi or suddenly murdered or raped someone, I would still feel obliged to pay him back that money. I would probably say, "Okay, after this we are done. I'm not talking to you anymore." Um, but I would still feel bound by my earlier promise. Um, if I didn't want to give that person that money anymore, I would probably ask to please be released of that promise. Like I would probably say, "I still owe you that money. If you insist on it, I will give it to you, but I would prefer not to. So I ask you to please let it go." But that would be left to that other person, right? My point being, this person who said I had done something immoral herself clearly is not a person of character, clearly not a person who remembers her own promises, or who, if she thinks the person she has promised something to doesn't deserve it anymore, who still feels bound by them. And precisely for that reason, it doesn't really make me think if she judges something I did, and if she cancels me for it. If there's someone who has character and who is firm and consistent in his character, if that person were to tell me, you have done something wrong, and so wrong that I don't want to speak to you anymore, then I would take that very seriously. Then it would make me think and question myself. But if someone without character criticizes me, it doesn't really make me question myself. So that should always be the first question. How much character does somebody display? How much moral integrity does that person have? And that's the question to ask if you want to know how much is that person's own moral judgment, even insofar as it concerns others and their actions, how much is it worth, or is it worth anything at all? And I think it's also very much noteworthy and worthy of contemplation that the best people we have in this world are Kantians, whether they themselves know it or not, because Kant himself said that he, of course, didn't invent morality, and of course you don't have to read and study Kant, and that's not the only way to become a good person. So I'm not saying that good people have all read Kant and consciously decided to be the way Kant said they should be, but it just so happens that even without them knowing that this is also what Kant advocates for, they display a Kantian character and they talk about their moral duty. The best people we have in the world are precisely those people who don't just talk about compassion and empathy, but who talk about doing their duty, being able to look themselves in the eye, so having regard, having reverence for themselves. When I say the best people, of course, there are two people that should come to mind before everyone else. The two best, the two most moral people that are currently in the, let's say, in the eye of the public are, of course, Greta Thunberg and Francesca Albanese.
Yeah, as you said, we are doing this mission following 1 month after our last attempt. Both Conscience was bombed and disabled. So that's why we are trying again, because we cannot afford to give up. There is simply too much at stake. And in times of injustice, as we are seeing now, the genocide and blockade happening, we have to do everything we can to demand an end to these atrocities and war crimes committed by Israel. And for me personally, I happen to have a platform for some reason, and then it is my moral obligation to use that platform. And if my presence on this boat can make a difference, if that can show in any way that the world has not forgotten about Palestine, and to try once again to attempt to break the siege and open up a humanitarian corridor and deliver the extremely needed humanitarian aid, then that is a risk I'm willing to take. And it's something that we just simply have to do. We cannot just sit around and do nothing and watch this live stream genocide unfold in front of our very eyes. So we are doing this because we are human beings who care about justice. And when our complicit governments fail to step up, it falls on us, unfortunately, to do so.
You're the subject of threats right now.
As anyone who speaks out on the question of Palestine today, which includes many Jewish people and anyone else. So I'm in good company, let me tell you.
Do you feel, A, it's worth it, and B, you're achieving anything right now?
I don't know. Worth is not the first word that comes to my
Well, your
mind.
personal security is in jeopardy right now, isn't it?
Oh yeah. I'm asking myself. I have 2 young children, so my answer is. No one in my life is more important than anyone else, including you, Krishnan. So if you were in Gaza with your family, you would be very happy to have someone like me taking the risk, because you would be seen, at least. So worth is not exactly the word that comes to mind. It's a moral imperative. It's a moral call. This is what being cognizant of being part of humanity means to me in its simplest way. And again, I think there is no alternative to me. It's coming at great cost, at great risk, and at the same time, when I have the opportunity, I can sleep with a clear, light conscience. I wonder how leaders, including in this country, look at their children these days, have their meals, buy their things on Amazon or whatever. How can you carry out your life thinking that you have the power to stop it, and you're not doing that?
And in both cases, I don't know if they know anything about Kant. Francesca Albanese might, so I have never heard her mention Kant in particular. I've heard her mention being influenced by Italian writers and thinkers like Primo Levi. In the case of Greta Thunberg, she talked about doing her duty even back at 15.
Yes, I mean, the climate crisis is the biggest crisis humanity has ever faced, and if we don't do anything right now, we're screwed. And then I thought that I want to be able to, when I grow up, to look back and say, I did what I could back then, and it is my moral duty to do what I can, and then I just decided to do it because there's nothing I have to lose.
Not sure she studied Kant back then. Of course, it cannot be ruled out that maybe she heard something about him at school or from her parents, but be that as it may, once you yourself learned about Kant, and once you learn to look out for it, to look out for true morality the way Kant describes it, it becomes very obvious, because it really is a stark contrast from the usual either complete lack of morality or just the usual empathy for sentient beings and for their ability to feel pain, and humanist compassion for people's sufferings. It's a very stark contrast when you hear them talk about their moral duty. So since morality is based not just on empathy, compassion, good-heartedness, but on a firm character, Kant also very much believes that getting a character is the best preparation for being moral. As I already said, if you are firm and consistent in your principles, even if the principles as such are not moral, you already basically trained the firmness and strength of character that is needed for morality. Otherwise, you cannot really be made moral, Kant says. Because if you already have character, all it needs is that somebody convinces you, or that you yourself realize that something ought to be done. Like if you're someone who can stop smoking, when he decides I should stop smoking, it's bad for my health. Or if you are someone who, if he decides to go on a diet, actually sticks to it. Or if you are someone who, as I said, who flosses every night, even when he's feeling lazy. If you're someone who keeps his word, who is on time, you just need to know now what is your moral duty, and then you can do it. Otherwise, even if you do realize what your moral duty is, since you are without character, you will not do it, at least not consistently. Like, let's say a person without character didn't know about how our clothes are produced, or about there being a climate crisis. You just needed to tell them, well, those clothes you buy, the workers are being exploited, they are working under terrible conditions, they are basically slave workers, there's a lot of child labor, and therefore it's wrong to buy those clothes. Then the person will refrain from buying them. Or you just need to tell them, well, there's a climate crisis that is threatening our very civilization, and we need to lower our carbon emissions, therefore we cannot fly or so. Then that person will stop flying. Even if he would like those clothes, or if he would like that vacation, he will not do it anymore. But there are other people who, if you tell them about how workers are exploited, if you show them a documentary on child labor in sweatshops in Bangladesh or Cambodia, that person will feel bad and will not buy new clothes for a day, but then they see some commercial about the newest dress or whatever that they find cute, and then they will go and buy it again. Or if you tell them about the climate crisis and show them pictures of burning forests or so, they will feel bad, but then tomorrow someone invites them to come to a wedding on another continent, and they will immediately book a flight. So in that sense, Kant says, if you cannot even stick to your principles in small matters, how could you stick to moral principles when it really does matter? Like someone who says, oh, I should floss, but then every other day feels too lazy and skips flossing. Well, let's say that person lives in the Nazi time, and now a Jew approaches him and asks to be hidden. Even if that person understands that it would be the right thing to do to save that Jew's life, if his laziness prevents him from flossing, then surely now his cowardice, his fear, will prevent him from helping that Jew. While on the other hand, if he already had a character, if he already trained himself to not listen to his whims, to his drives, to his nature, but to stick to what he understood as right, then it is more likely that he will be able to do so now as well. So therefore, the very first thing that is needed for morality is to create for yourself a character. And in that sense, even so-called religious commandments can have their worth, as I explained much earlier, right? So if someone, let's say, follows all the 613 commandments of the Old Testament, all the Mosaic commandments, if someone is sure to only eat kosher food, to not work on the Sabbath, and so on and so on, that might seem pedantic in a way, but Kant would say at least it sort of trains character, and it sort of trains not being a slave to your drives and your desires. He would criticize this as superstition, as basically being pagan, if you believe that this itself is a religious action, and if you believe that this is what makes God favor you, if you believe that God really cares about how much you prayed, or what you ate or whatever, or if you worked on Saturdays, or if you fasted in Ramadan, if you really believe that this is what decides whether you go to heaven or hell, then you're a pagan and not really religious, according to Kant. I will explain that more when I get to his philosophy of religion. But if you use such a thing as, let's say, fasting in Ramadan to learn controlling your own urges, to learn not being like an animal, slave to your sensuality, then that can be a good thing. Because while in itself it is not moral or not religious to not eat during the day for 1 month, even when you are hungry, if you are someone who manages to do that, then maybe you can also manage, let's say, not to buy useless things from Amazon or useless things made in China, and thereby support slave labor and exploitation. That leaves only the question, how do you develop a character? And to that, Kant says, well, you need to sort of train it. You need to learn to keep your word, to take your own words, your own statements about what you are gonna do seriously, and to stick by what you said, and to not just keep your words to others, but most importantly, to keep your word to yourself, to learn to take your own word, your own stated intention, as if it was a wholly binding law that you couldn't possibly break. And to learn to rather not make promises at all, or not make plans at all, rather than break them. So if you do plan something, if you do state your intention to do something, only do it if you are absolutely sure that you're gonna do it. And also, secondly, learn to appreciate character, learn to value and respect and honor character in others, and learn to despise characterlessness, learn to see it as pathetic when someone shows to be unprincipled and self-contradicting. Because once you do that, you will not really be able to live with yourself anymore if you find yourself to lack in character. If you learn to have respect only for people who have character, since you will want to be able to respect yourself, that will sort of push you to yourself have character. And Kant also advises that the moment we start having a character should be a special occasion. Like he is convinced that this is not something that happens gradually, like I have more and more character, because I mean, character means ruling myself, following a principle always. If I do it only sometimes, I have no character at all. I am being ruled by my sensuality still. So this is not something gradual, but rather there needs to be a specific moment where I basically tell myself, from now on, I want to have character. From now on, I want to stop following my whims. I want to stop being several persons in one day doing one thing, the next day doing another thing. I want to stop being in contradiction with myself, but rather from now on, I want to do whatever I understood to be right. I want to follow my principles. And this should be sort of a special moment, Kant says. It should be like a solemn oath we swear to ourselves that from now on we will have a character. And Kant calls this moment a philosophical rebirth, because in a way it means that the old me is dying and a new me is being born. In a way it means that I'm born for the first time, because before I already existed as a sensual being with a sense mode, so with a sensual personality that nature made in me, but I was still sort of half an animal, even if I was a thinking animal. And only now, the moment I decide from now on I will have a character, only now do I start truly being a human being, truly acting like a rational being. So that is why it is like a new birth. And of course, this has somewhat Christian connotations also. Kant doesn't choose this name philosophical rebirth by accident, because this is sort of what the baptism is about, right? If you read the Bible itself, the baptism is sort of as a sort of rebirth. The old human, the human of the flesh, dies, and the Holy Spirit comes over you, and you are reborn, a new person. You are reborn in spirit, which is also why some groups, some Protestant groups, said that it doesn't make sense, it's worthless, it's wrong to baptize little babies who don't even know what's going on, let alone think about it or make that decision themselves, but rather you have to baptize the grown-ups, those who really made that decision from now on. I want to be like Christ. I want to be in the image of Christ. So you could say that this, what Kant is proposing here for starting to have character, is a sort of secular, not religious, but rather philosophical and moral self-baptism. Of course, baptism not necessarily by spraying water on yourself, but it should be taken equally seriously, and it should be an equally solemn act. So Kant also acknowledges that there is some danger in this. You should only do it once you really are ready for it. Because if you swear such a solemn oath and then break it, you cannot take yourself seriously anymore. And this is one issue with wanting to have a character, and many will probably know that from experience. If you set a certain goal for yourself, if you make a plan, like, okay, I want to lose weight, I will cut down on the snacks, or like, okay, I want to stop smoking, that was it, next year no cigarettes for me anymore, or I want to take school or university more seriously, I will now study at least half an hour every day, and then you don't do it, you end up being too lazy or following your urges again. There comes a point where you stop taking yourself seriously. Like, you may try again in the future, and then it doesn't work again, and you try again and again. And at some point, even while you are forming that intention in your head, that you won't do it anyway. Like, the person who for 5 years in a row has tried stopping to smoke, and every New Year's told himself, now I will stop, he might still do it because it's basically a habit at this time, that when the 6th year comes around, he will again say, oh, I will stop. But basically he already knows that he won't, and that means that now he won't even try anymore. He won't even try to to collect his strengths, and to fight down his urges to smoke. He won't even try to collect his strengths and to fight down his urges to smoke this time, because he has basically, through his past failures, already lost all trust in himself. So that's why this is dangerous, says Kant. And additionally, there's also the danger that it makes you a self-deceiver, because since we have to find ourselves pathetic, and since we have to lose all self-respect if we fail in following our own principles, to save ourselves from that, we are almost forced to lie to ourselves, to make up excuses. Like, the smoker won't just say, okay, I wanted to stop smoking, but now I don't stop because I'm a weakling and I can't stick to my principles. No, he will say something like, okay, I know I decided to stop smoking, but I'll just smoke for one more day. It won't make a difference. I will just not stop today, but rather tomorrow. Or, yeah, I mean, I stopped smoking. I mean, I didn't smoke for this whole week, so now I deserve one more cigarette, and this is really gonna be my last. Or, okay, I stopped smoking, but now my friend is offering me a cigarette. Like, I didn't decide to smoke again by myself. I'm just doing it because I'm getting offered one or whatever. Or, okay, I'm stopping with smoking, but today has been such a stressful day at work. I just need this one more cigarette. I can't just stop in one day. I need a sort of cool down. So you will make up excuses and lies for yourself. And this is incredibly dangerous, because nothing is more harmful towards having character than being a liar and being a self-deceiver. I will talk about in another lecture, I will talk about how important it is to Kant to be truthful, and especially to be truthful to yourself, and how to Kant that is really the true radical evil in the human being, that we are able to lie to ourselves. And no other evil would really be possible if we couldn't lie to ourselves and tell us, oh, it's not really evil what I'm doing here. So therefore, while Kant at several points in his writings or lectures advocates for people to undergo this philosophical rebirth, to solemnly swear to themselves to now have character, he also advises against doing this lightly. You should rather not do it at all, rather wait some more, rather be characterless for some more time and at least be honest about it, rather than try to get a character and then fail at it, and thereby start lying to yourself, and thereby start losing trust in yourself. And I just want to close this off with a biographical remark. Kant says about this philosophical rebirth that it can't come too early. Children, teenagers, even young men in his mind usually don't have character and usually aren't able to have character. This is more something for the second half of your life. And he says that usually we only acquire a character around 40. And 40 is an interesting number. I would probably be a bit more specific and go with 42, because in many traditions and many thought systems, that has been an important number. Like, for example, for the ancient Romans, 42 was the age when you could become a consul. Before, you couldn't. They made some exceptions sometimes. Again, rules should always have exceptions, and we should have enough power of judgment to know when we should make an exception. That is something that unfortunately was lost. Back then, they could make exceptions from their laws for someone like Scipio during the war with Carthage. Nowadays, we couldn't make an exception for, let's say, Greta Thunberg and say, okay, she clearly, even at 15, was mature enough to vote. She shouldn't have had to wait till she was 18. But that aside, so the Romans only allowed usually 42-year-olds to become consul. In astrology, for example, you will hear a lot of talk about the Uranus opposition. So Uranus takes about 84 years to circle around the sun, so to be back at the same point where it was when you were born. And therefore, after half that time, after 42 years, it's exactly at the opposite point from where it was at your birth. And so in astrology, that is considered an important point. Likewise, in my dad's talk, in my dad's system, he would talk of certain phases in life that would always last about 14 years. So at 42, you would complete the third phase and enter the fourth. So you should have developed an eye, you should have opened for you, and you should in the third phase have created a V from I and you. And now with the fourth phase comes the true adulthood. Now should start the phase of the heart, the phase of feeling. But this can also be a phase of confusion, a phase of a sort of twistness or laziness of the heart or melancholy. And likewise, we of course know of the midlife crisis that many people around that age, around 42, go through. So it seems to me that no matter how they talked about it and no matter how they tried to explain it, many people, many traditions, many peoples have found that this sort of middle phase of your life around 40, or more specifically around 42, is an important an important point where important changes may happen. And as for the biographical note, it seems that Kant himself underwent big changes around that age. The way so what's important is that Kant usually doesn't speak about himself much. He is reserved in that way. He doesn't think it's fitting to speak of yourself. So that's why Kant himself usually doesn't give biographical notes or personal information. And as I already mentioned, we have several biographies or several collections of memories that after his death were published by his friends, but those friends were usually younger, only knowing Kant in the second half or even just in the last quarter of his life. That's why the information of the first half of his life are kind of sparse and we don't know that much. But there are some hints that seem to point to the fact that in the first half of his life, Kant wasn't quite as firm in his character yet. Kant wasn't quite as principled yet and didn't fully live his life according to maxims. There's even one episode, one anecdote he himself told his friends where he got drunk at some point, being invited over somewhere, drinking with others, and he apparently was so drunk that on his way home he couldn't find the entrance to his street, which was a rather narrow street. And there are some hints, the way Kant speaks about this philosophical rebirth, it seems to be more than just something theoretical he has thought up and recommends for others. No, it seems to me that this is something he did himself, this solemnly swearing to yourself to from now on have character. And he probably did it about this age, about 40. If you look at his biography, and I already gave a lecture on Kant's life and development, you will find that this age is an important turning point where Kant struggled quite a bit before the things he struggled with got resolved. This is true both on a personal as well as on a philosophical level. On a personal level, Kant at 40, so that would have been 1764, or rather, let's say at 42, so 1766. This is probably around the time where he gave up on marriage. Kant famously was a bachelor all his life, but this wasn't planned. This just sort of happened. It's just because of his, let's say, professional and economic situation that he didn't marry before. There were two instances where he was interested in two different women and was contemplating marrying them. But ultimately he didn't, because he felt he wasn't ready for it. He couldn't really support a woman as his wife, let alone children. And at a later point in life, he said, so when he was a professor, when he was secure enough and he had enough money, at a later point he told someone, while I had use for a woman, I could not support one. And when I could support a wife, I had no use for one anymore. And I would guess it was probably around this time where he, accepted the fact that he would be a lifelong bachelor, where he resolved that he would not find a wife anymore. It's also about this time where he is thinking about his economic situation, because at that time he is still magister, as it was called, so a master. He taught as a magister at university for 15 years, which basically means he was not tenured. And at first that was fine, but around this age, he's starting to get worried about his old age. What will happen when he will be too old and too frail to teach and will have no steady income? And now he gets temptations at exactly this age, because he gets these offers to teach in other cities, and he doesn't really want to leave Königsberg, but he gets offered the professorship in Jena, and he gets offered the professorship in Erlangen, and he really contemplates it, and it's sort of a gamble to not accept this maybe only chance at a steady income even in old age, and to sort of gamble on the fact that soon a professorship in Königsberg will be vacant and he will get a post. The gamble worked out, and in 1770, so when he was 46, he did end up becoming a tenured professor, and from then on his income and everything was safe, and he could live in Königsberg till old age. But around 42 is probably the age when he was struggling with his worries and contemplating leaving Königsberg if he needed to. On a less personal, on a more philosophical level, Kant first grew up in the Leibniz-Wolffian philosophy that was reigning in Germany at that time. And in the 60s, he is getting increasingly frustrated with it. He was never an orthodox Leibniz-Wolffian. He was always someone who thought for himself, but now he's increasingly critical. He increasingly sees that, as he would call it, dogmatic metaphysics of his time doesn't really deliver on its promises. It promises to have proof for God, for life after death, but those proofs they don't really hold. They don't really work. And in the 60s, there's also the dialogue, there's also the exchanging letters with two other important German thinkers of his time, with Moses Mendelssohn, the Jewish thinker, the proponent of the Haskalah, the so-called Jewish Enlightenment, and on the other hand, the physicist Heinrich Lambert. And this dialogue and the questions they raised and the thoughts they provided, especially Lambert, was very important in him developing his critique of pure reason. And then also in that time there is Kant's interest in Swedenborg, the Swedish mystic who claimed to have visions of the dead, who claimed to have visions of life after death. And Kant was interested in that. Kant read Swedenborg's books, but was quite disappointed. Said that Swedenborg, the books were a waste of money. Swedenborg couldn't give any proof for his visions and the truth of those visions. And in 1766, so precisely again at that age of 42, Kant published his book Dreams of a Spirit Seer, which is one of his longest works in his pre-critical time, where on the face of it, he writes a polemical critique of Swedenborg and basically says it's nonsense, those visions, they can't be proved. But if you read more closely, you find that he's not just criticizing Swedenborg, but also the regular metaphysicians, the Leibniz-Wolfian metaphysicians, because while they don't claim to be visionaries, rather they claim to prove that there is a life after death and there is a God, not through visions, but through their reasons, through logical conclusions. Kant says it comes down to the same thing. They too are what in German is called Schwärmer, enthusiasts, people who overstep the boundaries of experience and go into the realm of the supersensual, a bit about which we cannot know anything. So in a sense, that book, which he published precisely at 42, is not just him refuting Swedenborg, but is also him providing a final rejection of the Leibniz-Wolfian philosophy with which he had grown so discontent. And then a few years later, about the same time he becomes professor, so in 1770, Kant starts the silent decade, where he barely publishes anything, where he just thinks about philosophy and reflects and comes up with his own critical system, to then in 1781 finally publish the Critique of Pure Reason. So you can see that both on a personal level, having to think about his future, his old age, having to accept that he wouldn't marry, having to worry about whether he would still get to be professor in Königsberg or not, and also on a philosophical level, finally rejecting the philosophy of his day and starting to fundamentally criticize it and to come up with his own new philosophical revolution. That both happened about the same time, around the time Kant was 42. And that gives me grounds to believe that maybe Kant himself underwent a sort of midlife crisis around that time and ultimately overcame it. Ultimately, his issues, his struggles, both the personal one as well as the philosophical one, were resolved. And that gives me reason to believe that he's speaking from experience when he talks about this philosophical rebirth happening around 40. And it really is something he underwent himself. But with that, I'm done speaking about character as such and about why it is the good character which is truly morally good to Kant, not the good mode of sense, not being good-natured or good-hearted. And so next I want to talk more specifically about what now makes a good person, why good actions are not enough, but rather what is needed to be good is having truly good will. My deep thanks be to my supporters, Thomas Doringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.